Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, and you're listening to Incredible Life Creator Podcast. My guest today is Bryan Ramirez. Bryan Ramirez is part of the John Maxwell Team under Dr. Maxwell and is also an international dating coach that has learned the art of class and charisma to help others create a life of love and joy and learning to be successful without having affluence or influence to be necessary, but by being the right person at the right place and time. Welcome to the podcast, Bryan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leonard. Kimberly, of course.
Yes. So happy to have you on. And, we met at, I had David Meltzer on my podcast earlier, and actually, I don't think it's been published yet because I have a lot of them already recorded, but I had him on my podcast and so got to know him. And so then I was on his texting list, if you will. And he invited me to go to Avalon, which is here in Georgia. It's just a nice hotel. And he was having a meetup there and he was answering questions. And he's a business person, very spiritual person. But anyways, we were standing next to each other and listening to what David had to say, just standing in the lobby of this hotel. And I think we were already connecting, even though we weren't talking. We are already kind of starting to connect, maybe on that spiritual or under the surface level while he was talking. So it's really interesting. And then after, of course, when David was done talking, we actually connected. So, yes. And it was, very nice to connect with you and to learn about you and what you're doing and, just your spiritual journey. So just so people can get to know you, why don't you tell us about you, just your story, how you started out and where you're at today?
So, yeah, just like you said, it's kind of funny how we were just kind of vibrating on the same frequency when we were just kind of in the flow of things. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how my whole life has been, right? I've always had this innate understanding of people that I just couldn't really put any words to. And as I kind of went through my childhood, I had to really understand what people meant to me because, growing up in a first generation household, my parents came from Colombia, so very hardworking. And I was kind of isolated very young, right? So my parents wanted to protect me just because of, their upbringing. They wanted to make sure that I had the best upbringing as well. And as I learned to kind of socialize on my own, I learned that I just kind of understood people at a different level. I just kind of understood them on an emotional level, on an energetic level. And that kind of created such a interesting experience for me, just because I had so much of this sensitivity to the world that was overwhelming. I learned later on in my early 20s, I'm about to be 30 tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
funny
happy
saying
birthday.
that. Thank you. That I have this high sensory sensitivity processing. So they call us HSPs or empaths, right? And anything that comes to our senses, such as lights, such as touch, any sounds, any smells, any taste, it can be very overwhelming for us. And of course, that could be debilitating for some people. And that just created such a vigor in my life. I was just very tenacious. I always wanted to figure out things. I was just very curious. So when I had my first experience in terms of facing like a near-death experience, I was in Colombia and I was robbed, right, at gunpoint. And I didn't really understand what was going on at the moment, just because it happened so fast. But when you experience something like that, because in Colombia, it just happens like every day, It's not like here where an investigation happens. It's just something that's very tragic actually over there, because as a developing country, second world country, they have the resources, but the government is not very much included into helping the people. So that night, I just started having very vivid dreams, more than I had before, and that just kind of catalyzed such an awakening in myself. And as I began to understand that life was very short, that it's not promised for anybody, like tomorrow could be our last day, today could be our last day, I wanted to make sure that I made the most of it, right? And, you know, growing up, going through middle school, high school, I didn't really make much friends. Like I didn't make something that was very concrete, very grounded, right? Because I moved kind of halfway through my adolescence, and I just didn't have those social cues that were necessary for me to create more meaningful relationships the way that I wanted to. So I started looking into the dating community, right? So I started going online and kind of figuring out how to make relationships with just random people and have a girlfriend for once, right? I just felt so weird that I just didn't have a girlfriend. And that kind of led me to two spiritual books that kind of just changed my life. One was The Way of Superior Man, which was by David Data, and the other one was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And that just kind of just opened up the whole shebang, if I would call it, if anything. And I just devoted myself to wanting to be a coach. And it took me a little bit longer than most people just because of my sensitivity. But once I got it, it was something that I was really, really confident in because I really understood people. And it was something that just called me, right? So, and it wasn't just about the relationships, it was about the impact that I could help with men specifically, just because my mom had 9 sisters, I have a sister, my dad has a sister. So women have been a big influence in my life, right? And just having that specific relationship with my father, I always wanted to make sure that he understood that he was a huge impact in my life.
Mhm.
So being a leader, you know, being part of the John Maxwell team was something very important to me because that was something that I had to do. It was something that I had to step in. And it's something that I've always done in my entire life, which was when no one steps up, everyone looks towards, you know, someone to actually be the leader. And I've had no, you know, personal training in terms of being a leader, but going through that process of taking someone in a whole different country and helping them make meaningful relationships, influence people, um, and you know, finding someone that they actually want to connect with, you know, someone that they trust, and make a meaningful relationship. That was something that opened my eyes,
Mhm.
especially as I traveled and got to learn so much more about myself as well. So I became a dating coach, and I did that for about 4 years professionally. I was kind of in the realm of the dating community for about 10 years. So now I have kind of transitioned that idea of dating as spiritual practice, because what I've learned so much is that women have taught me so much about my own spirituality, especially as a man. And that has brought me many experiences that only the mystics can actually speak of. So, getting to the point that I'm now using relationships as spiritual practice, and creating something that people can see that allows them to realize who they really are at the deepest level.
Nice. So you had quite an extended family, and it sounds like
Yes.
you had a very supportive family. And, you know, growing up, you were very sensitive. and you said you had difficulty actually making friends, but within your family unit, it sounds like there was a lot of support. So how did that family support build you or develop you as a person?
So I will have to admit that my family has always supported me because they love me, but they never have had the opportunity to understand me. That has always been the disconnect between us. So in terms of family, we're so close. Like, if anything, we're best friends, right? But in terms of understanding who I am, as I've developed through all my stages, I've become very much of a foreigner within my own, right? So because my parents have a different upbringing, they they see it from their um, ideologies. They see it from their paradigms. So they can only understand it from their perspective and their point of views. I've been able to kind of understand where they were coming from at a very young age, just because I remember just being very poor and living with a different family, and how my parents have literally just came from the bottom and made a life for themselves. So when my parents saw me choose to be a dating coach, or a life coach that didn't have uh like a safety net or a plan B, where I left a corporate job, doing sales and retail, they didn't understand where it was coming from, right? Now, did they always love me in the whole entire process? Yes, by all means. But were they always scared? Yes, every single day, because that's how they lived, right? They always understood that, because nothing is promised. They always wanted to make sure that their children were safe, and they wanted to embed those same values in us and my sister as well.
Mhm.
So when I created this new idea in their mind of who I was, it just created more of a dissonance. It was very interesting, because all I ever wanted to do was communicate with my parents, right? Everything that I've ever done was to be a better communicator with my parents. But it seemed like the more that I learned how to communicate, the more I learned about myself, which created more of a distance between us, which happens, right? Everybody goes through their stages where, even in adolescence, you have that absent adolescence. And sometimes it takes someone to have a kid to kind of understand where your parents are coming from.
Mhm.
But for me, I didn't have those traditional relationships that, most teenagers or, young adults will actually have. Um, Even my relationships were kind of unorthodox to what they would actually think I would want, right? Half the time they're wondering what I'm going to do next. And it's very interesting, because as I'm, turning 30, they're, they have no idea who I am at all.
Mhm.
And most people actually do not know who I am. And the funny thing is that, because I have done this whole entire, growth within myself, the only person that knows who I am is me.
Mm.
And that's created such a stability within myself, even though the outside world may not reflect that for the common person, the layman. Um, but I think because of the love that my parents have always had for me, and because I've always sought their approval, even though I've always had it. I've
Mm.
always had my parents' approval, but in a manner that met their criteria, that met their value systems. It's brought me to places that I would have never imagined actually being in. You know, like I've pushed myself to limits where, you know, I thank God so much, just for so much, that it's allowed me to actually have my own self-realization. And, you know, hopefully one day my parents can really understand everything that they've given me. So it's
Exactly.
good. Yeah, it's just a beautiful process. And I wish that I can actually give that to them the way they've given it to me.
Mhm. Nice. And why is it so important to you, or why was it so important to you in the past to be able to connect with people at that deep level? Because you're not talking about going and networking to say, hey, how are you? You know, and real surface. You actually want to communicate at a deep level and connect at a deep level. Why is that so important? And what does that give you when you do that?
So, you know, those, uh, I guess there's like theories or like these hypotheses that people that kind of follow zodiacs or astrology, they love that because they want it to be understood, right? That's basically where I came from, right? Because, you know, growing up, I was just very, very creative, right? Like I always knew what I always wanted to do. Like I was very blessed that I I kind of knew my purpose. Like I always wanted to do something huge in the world. And whatever that was, like I always knew that I was going to be a leader, right? So it kind of just fell into place. It always had this like domino effect. But the most important thing was when I saw, and mostly it was feeling, when I felt people that they felt heard, when they felt seen, that was something that I wanted within myself, right? And you know, as I've transitioned, you know, back and forth as a dating coach and a consciousness coach, I've understood that the world is a reflection of who I am, right? As I see the world, so am I, and that everything is a reflection of my consciousness. So when I felt isolated and unloved and unwanted, or that I felt like people hated me, I started to understand that that was a reflection of how I felt about myself.
Mm.
So when I started to give, right, an outward loving presence, I started to see that that was being reciprocated back.
Mhm.
So I wanted to attract that in my life. I wanted to make sure that I was attracting the right things, the right people, because I was attracting the wrong things and the wrong people for a long time. And I was just very sensitive to energy. Like I just had such ups and downs, and I still do every now and then, but I can deal with them a lot more readily, right? But you know, every day I cry, right? It's not anything that's unheard of within my family. They kind of understand that too, so they've accepted that part of myself. But it's gotten to the point that I want people to really understand that I understand. Like I understand where they're coming from,
Mhm.
and that they can have someone that they can trust. Because a lot of the growth that people actually will go through is alone. And because I've been alone for so long, to have that, you know, that luxury, that opportunity to actually grow,
Mhm.
it's very scary, you know, and you have to have something to trust. I can call it a higher power, God, the universe, but it's something that you have to really see that's beyond yourself. And sometimes if you just have someone as moral support, that you feel that connects with you, that understands you, where you're coming from, that helps so much along the journey,
Mhm.
especially if it's spiritual, if it's relational, mental, emotional, anything above.
Yeah. And I think, we all want that. We all need some type of connection, and we want to be understood.
Yes,
So you
very
started,
important.
yeah, you started working with men in dating situations. So going from someone who couldn't do relationships basically when you were young or weren't doing them very well, to being the trusted advisor to men who are probably have some um insecure feelings, something that makes it so that they cannot meet women, or at least not the woman they want to meet. So
Yeah.
talk about that. How did you get into that, and how do you help these men?
So it's a funny thing just because the way that I like to describe it is if you ever saw the movie Hitch with Will Smith, it's kind of similar to that, right? Now, when you go to any event where you meet influencers and you meet executives, any business type individuals, it's always like a party trick, right? It's like, oh, do the party trick, right? And what I've learned is that because I am just very developed in my intra and interpersonal intelligence, I can help anybody at any level, right? So I've helped people with affluence and influence, right? I've had people that have been very good looking and people that are on the autism spectrum and people that have never had a girlfriend before, right? And they all have something that they're insecure about. And there's always something that they want to improve because what I've learned is that men need women to understand what it feels like to be a man. Right. Now, what that means for everybody is going to be completely different. But what I've learned is that the best way that you can understand yourself is by holding a mirror to yourself.
Mhm.
And women do that the best, right? Women are innate and, they have this keen sense of finding the weakness of a man so well that it was almost scary to understand that I am the man I am today because of the women in my life, right?
Mhm.
Because women are always on the man side. They always want men to succeed. They always want men to win. And what I wanted to do was get my master's in masculinity out over at Stony Brooks in New York with Michael Kimmel. Unfortunately, they shut down that program 2 years ago. So that was something that I wanted to kind of transition into. I wanted to be that leadership role where I was actually doing a lot of research in this crisis of masculinity that we were kind of seeing. Because a lot of it was that either men didn't have the ability to understand what their masculine energy was, or that they were repressing so much of their emotions because they didn't want to be too sensitive.
Mhm.
So what I've gotten is that I'm a perfect balance because I can understand both sides. And that allowed me to speak to both audiences, especially because a lot of the people that are very successful with the company that I was working with, they they have been tycoons in pretty much anything. It could be the restaurant business, it could be business. We have had therapists and psychologists where you can, have this idea of what people are thinking, but when it comes to women, they had no idea. It's like that Mel Gibson movie where it's just like what women want.
Mhm.
So because I was raised by women, I had that ability to really understand where they were coming from. But it was difficult for myself too because I needed to step up at a higher level that was necessary for me to understand what I was doing because now I was in a leadership role and now I was being looked towards not only by women but men as well.
Mhm.
So
So,
what does that look like?
mhm.
Yeah. Um well, it really depends because most oftentimes a lot of these individuals, they didn't have the socialization that they wanted growing up,
Mhm.
or they've had some relational problems. Sometimes we've had people that have been divorced and they're trying to get back into dating. Sometimes we've had individuals that just wanted to do better in life. And what that kind of signified was, there's a certain type and caliber of woman that you wanted to attract, which means that you kind of have to you up your game, which means that you have to improve all these areas of your life, not just financially, but like emotionally, and how that reflects in your relationships and the relationship that you have with yourself. So we'll get some guys, right? We'll go to different cities and everybody's different. Everybody has their stories. And you just kind of work with people where they're at, right? Because you want them to understand again that they're heard, that they're protected, that just like Hitch in the movie, that you can trust your wingman through this whole entire process, because that's what you want this safety. And most oftentimes the scariest thing for a man is to approach a woman.
Wow. So, just to review in case people haven't watched that movie, in Hitch, there's this guy who's pretty awkward and he really loves this executive woman, gorgeous executive woman. And he's just kind of a goofy guy. He has these goofy
Yes.
things. He's got an inhaler. He gets nervous. I mean, he's brilliant guy, but he doesn't have the social
Yes.
things he needs. And so he has this friend slash dating coach who is in his ear, like they have some kind of system where he can tell him what to say, what to
Yeah.
do, and he follows it exactly just as he said it. And the funny thing I found out though at the end of the movie is that when the woman finds out that he was using a dating coach, she's really upset because she thinks,
Of course.
well, who have I been with? If it's not really him, then who have I been with? Just somebody pretending to be something he's not. And she said,
Exactly.
I just really loved that when he used his inhaler and then got mad and threw it. And when he did this other goofy thing at the game, and Hitch goes, oh, that was him. That was him.
Yeah.
She's like, the goofy parts were the part that she fell in love with. It wasn't him doing even the perfect things. It was the goofy things, the things that were unique about him that she fell in love with.
Yes. So what we started to understand was that vulnerability was probably the most important thing that women were attracted to. Authenticity was the other part, because you can't have any type of relationship. Like, of course, if you're out and about in a bar, that's a whole different setting, right? But if you don't have that trust or that comfortability that you have with someone, like, you're never going to have that connection. And that's what made it, so significant for her, because she was so connected to him. She had that trust with him. And when she felt like it was inauthentic or disingenuine, that trust was severed, right? There was something that kind of just hurt, because she actually showed who she was.
Mhm.
She was an executive, right? Where most oftentimes men are approaching those women a whole different manner, instead of just like a normal person, right? And that's most oftentimes what women want. They just want to be treated like any other person, right? They want to be seen for who they are. And the funny part is that we'll get guys that just kind of understand that, women want a challenge, but they also want that ability to just be silly, be
Mhm.
playful, and flirtatious. And that's just rare in these days, especially because a lot of our socialization has been kind of cut, right? So what a dating coach does is we actually go through the whole entire process of, just kind of like in the ear, but we do it in person, right? Because we're looking at the sub communication. So they say what, like, about 3% of communication is verbal, and the rest is nonverbal.
Mhm.
So we don't even have to actually listen to them most oftentimes. If we wanted to, it's because we're trying to let them understand how a conversation is supposed to go, because they get stuck in that friend zone, and that's debilitating for most men,
Mhm.
because that friend zone has been something that people have made so many videos about, that the dreaded friend zone. But most oftentimes, that's where I want to be. Like, I want to be in the friend zone because I want it to mean something for me when I'm going for something that I want. Like, my best relationships have been because I was in the friend zone, but I showed that I was different. I showed intention. I showed that I, I value myself, right? But I also wanted to let people once again know that you can trust me, right? Because
Mhm.
the dating industry can be very, very scary sometimes, especially if you're looking at any of the red pill communities or black pill communities or any of the pickup communities, because that's where it all started. It all started with men that actually wanted to get back at women, right? And where it comes from is a lack of love for oneself, and because that is reflected onto women, women get the lack for it. They get shamed for many things, and it's a lack of responsibility on the man's side that makes it very difficult for dating coaches to get a good reputation. If you ever had any research done on what a dating coach actually does, because a lot of what I've seen is that, it can be manipulative, or it can be one-sided in terms of the gains,
Mhm.
because it doesn't have that integration of what the women want in terms of a relationship, because you'll start to see that women are actually trying to guide men, right? You'll see women like Kezia Noble that have been, you know, big figures in the dating community that help men actually understand what a woman's perspective is. So it's very interesting as you start seeing the different styles of people and what their intentions are, because my intention has always been that once you hire me, I don't want you to hire me again, right? Because that's what you hire me for. Like, you want to be the best version of yourself, where you can rely on yourself, where you can trust yourself, where people can trust you. So if you're coming towards someone, or to me specifically, for any kind of help, it's because you want to improve a certain area of your life. Most oftentimes it's the emotional relationship that you have with yourself, or the socialization, the ability to have that savoir-faire, going anywhere, any place, meeting the right people, get in the right places, right? That's a whole different area of that. But when it comes to dating, you should know what you offer, right? Like, I want people to understand that as a man, this is what I offer. And I don't need anybody else to keep telling me that, because that becomes debilitating too, right? It becomes very difficult for men to trust themselves, because they always need someone to tell them what to do. And that's something that I even parted with my own company, because we had different value systems in terms of, they wanted to make money off these individuals, and I wanted them to actually become, happy. I wanted them to be in very fulfilling relationships, and that's something that can be difficult to come to terms with, especially if these are the people that are paying your house bills or paying your condo in some foreign country or something like that. So um, I knew where my values were when I went in, and I know what my values are still. And that's something that I hold true, just because, again, I was raised by women and I love them very much. So when I see that people don't like women, or they have some form of hatred towards them, that's the first thing that I address very quickly. because it's never going to work. It's just not going to work between us or you and and other people or other women. And that's something that they have to come to terms with, because that door has to be crossed, that you have to go through that door eventually, right? In any kind of relationship, because that's what you're going to carry on to your relationship, and that's what you're going to carry on into your children. So if that's something that's not important to you, then it's something that needs to be looked at, for sure.
Exactly. And it seems like the roles of men and women in relationships has been a little muddied in the last few
Hmm.
years, because women are doing so many of the things that just men used to do.
Hmm.
And so, me as a single person, I want to be in a relationship with someone that's, pretty equal to me as far as communication and our, confidence, and um, someone that I can communicate with. But, in some ways, women have made men redundant, because, we're doing so many of the things they were doing. So, what are the roles? What should we be looking for? I know I want someone who is confident and is
Hmm.
emotionally healthy.
So what I've learned is that how you do anything is how you do everything. So from the very beginning, I kind of understood that women are always looking at men's subcommunication, the way they treat people. It could be someone elderly, how they hold the door, how they compose themselves, whether they have a pen in their jacket or they have a watch, right? Small details to the big details, where it's who is the leader of men, right? Who's the one that is creating the connections between the men and women of the group, who has the ability to be honest and vulnerable. So when it comes to confidence, for me, confidence was a very, very simple idea. It's an imaginary line that you draw in front of fear, and then you just step over, right? Courage is fear walking, right? Because how many times, oh Lord, how many times have I been to the bars and I just didn't understand why people didn't like me or my approach, right? Because women don't really reject men. They reject the approach, and given circumstances, right? Maybe it's not the right time, that she just wants to be out with her friends. Maybe she just broke up with her boyfriend. Her bird flew out, right?
Mhm.
That's something that we always have to take in consideration. Now, men are, a little bit on the lower end of the evolutional scale, because women just have this ability to understand subcommunication at a deeper level than men do, right? So it takes a little bit more of an effort for men to understand what subcommunication is, because they're looking at the superficial level, right? They're not looking at the uh, what you would call the subconscious level, right? The thing that is feeding deeper information. So when I always tell this story. It's the same thing over and over again. I would cry going to the bars, leaving the bars, and then I would have my hand on the door handle, and I would just say no. I want a different life. I want a different life. So I would just go back. And whether that was just saying hi to someone, or just complimenting on their shirt, or someone saying no, like you're not my type, or you're too short, or whatever it was, I did one more, right? And I took that with everything that I did in life. So how you do anything is how you do everything. So whether something took a lot longer for me, right? Whether this took 10 years, what it would take someone who's taller or good looking, or wasn't as sensitive me as it would take 2 3 years for them, it took a lot longer in me. I wanted something very specific, because I wanted to be a specific person in the world, and the world was going to test that, right? So women, again, were on my side, but they were going to test that person, right? So that is something that I've learned is part of evolution. Like women are always going to say no to 50% of men, right? To make what you would call the human species stronger, right? And that's what kind of created such a void or a discrepancy in terms of what it takes to be a man, because most oftentimes people are just kind of put into jobs that they're not really ready for, or relationships that they're not ready for. And that made it very difficult for people to have the emotional intelligence to be in that relationship, or the social intelligence to move in the world properly, efficiently, effectively. So, being confident is the same thing that it was, years ago, except that we're not facing saber-toothed tigers or Tyrannosaurus Rex. We're facing women, right? Because women are always going to make men self-conscious, right? They're going to remind us of our mortality, of who we are, and whether we are actually the person that we're portraying. Because whatever we portray, right, whatever we project, people are going to accept or they're going to reject. And again, women just have this innate ability to sense whether it's true or not, right? It's just something that is just in their bones, that they just are hardwired to let us know whether we are congruent or not with the person that we're actually giving. So when it comes to confidence, that's something that we have to be honest with ourselves first, because even with me, the moments that I've messed up the most have been the best interactions that I've ever had. Every single time. Like the moments that I've been terrified, just shaking in my skin, have been the most meaningful relationships I've ever had in my entire life. And that was just because it's just that imaginary line I draw from the fear.
And there's something exciting about going into the unknown also.
Yes.
Well, you just, like you said, you step over the line and keep going forward, almost like you're walking into a dark room and you don't know what's going to be in there.
Exactly. And I think that's important for both sides. It's very important to just be vulnerable and put yourself out there, because that's what makes it worth it. That's what makes every relationship worth it, because that's when you've did your best, and that's when you know what you're willing to put in and give for a relationship, and that's when you know what you want because of how much you put in.
Exactly. So let's talk about spirituality. So you talked
Okay.
about, women being able to communicate on that more subconscious level, or they're noticing things. But, I grew up in a Christian home, and to me, it was really important to have someone who had my same beliefs, or, at least we can communicate and have something similar as far as our spiritual life. So how important is that? And how do you find that person that you connect with in that way?
That's an interesting topic, and I'm glad that you bring that up, just because it's not something that people talk about very often. Because you want, so it always comes back to like human evolution. We all like attracts like, right? So when you have similar ideologies, philosophies, paradigms, you're communicating in the same language, right? So they have the love languages, how people are physically inclined to receive love that way, or they have gifts, or time. It can also be words of affirmation. You're looking at ways that you feel that someone is receiving you, right? Because again, it can be something that you may find in terms of religion, or maybe their upbringing, maybe it's their philosophy of life. If someone is willing to, I wouldn't say compromise, but at least open up to the other person,
Mhm.
then that creates so much more of a common ground for any form of communication, because you're understanding it. You want it the way the other person wants it,
Mhm.
right? You are understanding where they're coming from, right? You're not closing the doors, you're not cutting any means of communication. It's very, very important that they feel heard, right? So with my relationship, I always want, my lover to always understand that whatever she feels like other people think of her, or what her family thinks, or what it may be in terms of you know what she feels is her philosophy of life, I get it,
Mhm.
because I'm willing to understand it, and I'm willing to be patient enough to want to understand. Whether
Mhm.
I understand it or not, I want her to understand that she's so important to me that I want to open my mind to it. Like I want to understand where you're coming from, so I can understand it from my perspective, so I can give you that, so I can understand, okay, so maybe you call God the universe, or maybe you call it nature, or maybe you call it um a goddess,
Mhm.
right? It's a different way of understanding it, but then I'm understanding it from my perspective, where I can give you that sense of security, that
Mhm.
sense of approval, right? That sense of understanding that I understand where you're coming from, and that you're not alone, right? Because most oftentimes what happens is that people feel misunderstood, and that's where resentment comes in. Like, oh, you don't understand me, and that's when
Mhm.
emotions are bottled up, or maybe they're too expressed, and it makes it very difficult for the relationship to actually develop, because you're not focusing on what's the important part, the spiritual aspect. So I think all relationships should have a spiritual aspect. I think that eventually they all get to a
Mhm.
spiritual aspect, even if you don't think that your life is spiritual. The absence of it will create some form of spirituality as well, because you're understanding it from a human perspective, because we're spirits living, having a human experience, right? So that's how I understood it from my perspective. It was more about patience
Mhm.
and really, really listening, because I've had made the mistake of not listening and just, you don't understand me, right? Where I was putting my needs first, or I felt misunderstood first, and that, my needs were more important than the other person's.
Exactly. And I was thinking as you were talking that even within my family or my best friends, we all have faith, but
Hmm.
none of them is identical. We all
Exactly.
experience our faith in different ways, and just letting the person be them and have that experience, and understanding that they're having that experience and it works for them, and you having your experience, and the other person letting you be, or be that person and have that experience yourself. I think that's all people really want, is just to be loved just for who they are, not just their faith, but who they are,
Hmm.
their little quirky weird things, whatever, just being loved for who they are and accepted. Part of that goes a long way in feeling understood.
Yeah, because again, from my perspective, I feel like we're spirits having a human experience.
Mhm.
So again, spirituality has always been very important to me, no matter what. And especially because I started this journey of dating as a spiritual journey, right? I've always understood that women have created such an augmented experience of my spirit going through this life, because the way that a woman's going to test me is 1,000 times more than the world's going to test me, because she's going to really know who I am, and she's going to sense exactly when I'm incongruent, when I'm lying to myself, and that's something that is undeniable. And if it weren't for that spiritual element of a relationship, I wouldn't have grown so much and so quickly through my life. because most people would say I'm an old soul, right? And having that idea in my head, is it's just funny, just because most oftentimes my lovers have been older than me, right? And they always have reminded me of how young I was, but I never saw myself as that. I always saw them and who they were and how important they were to me. And because I allowed our spirits to grow, right? It just opened up so many dimensions in terms of my own self-realization. Like if it weren't for my lover if it weren't for the ability of me seeing myself in the eyes of my lover, I would probably still seek the validation of other women, seek the validation of other men. I would just be very lost, right? But again, like I said from the beginning, is that women just have a mirror and they show us very, very well, very, very clearly, very, very vividly, in a manner that I can look in the mirror as many times as I can, but not the way that she'll reflect the way that she does.
Got it. So at this point, are you, what kind of coaching are you doing? I would like for people to be able to, connect with you or contact you, and what services do you have now?
Yes. So I'm still doing dating, of course, but more on a spiritual level, as we've kind of came to the crux of, because my philosophy is that without women, we will never understand what it feels like to be a man. I help men and women as well. So I let women understand what it feels like, attracting the men that they want in their lives. Whether they're going through a divorce, whether they're experiencing a new facet of their lives, new stage, it's all the same because it's all a reflection of who we are. And as you are learning how to grow spiritually through relationships, you're also learning how to grow spiritually yourself. So at this point in my life, I would probably call myself a spiritual relationship coach, right? Where it allows you to not just grow spiritually, but it allows you to understand yourself at a deeper level and understand how the energy that you put out is so important. The thoughts that you have of yourself, the self-talk, the emotions that you have, how you feel about yourself, the self-love that you are giving yourself or you aren't giving yourself is so, so important, because the most important thing is you and how you feel, right? Because without that, there's no relationship with anybody. So you can call me a love guru or a relationship coach, a dating coach, whatever you want to call it. I'm helping people understand what love is.
Got it. And then do you have a website or on social media somewhere where people can actually connect with you?
Yes. So at the moment, I'm actually in the process of creating my website. So it's class, CLASS dash coaching.com. And that should be up in a couple of months or so. I'm still in the process of working with a web developer, and we're putting out a lot of content that I haven't put out in like a year or two, because I've been going through a lot of spiritual awakenings. So what we're trying to do is bring all that wisdom and make it, available to the public. So the best way to reach me would be through my Instagram, which would be Buddha Yogi. And Buddha is spelled Budda, and then Yogi is Yogi. So it's one word, Budda Yogi.
Okay. And I have that I can put in the show notes, so I'll make sure
Thank
and
you
do
so
that.
much.
So just a personal question. What
Of
gives you
course.
the most joy and happiness in your life at this point?
Wow. You're gonna make me cry. God. Yeah, I'm just so grateful. Just God first, always. Um, because without God, I just wouldn't have my parents, which have taught me so much about love and have pushed me so much to want to bring that to the world, to manifest something very beautiful like that. Because um life's short, and I've given everything up for God, and if it weren't for God, I wouldn't be here, and I still give everything up to God. So that gives me the greatest joy. um I'm glad to have been living for almost 30 years now, and I'm just grateful for everybody. Just, feeling so much love in my life is just something that I want to really let people experience, because every day I'm so filled with so much love
Mhm.
that, like, the smallest things just fill me up with so much joy, and it just swells my heart up that it just feels like it hurts sometimes.
Mhm.
And I couldn't see it any other way. Like, I'm very glad that I've done the work,
Mhm.
and it wouldn't be possible if I weren't, they say, much is tested too much to those that are given much. So I'm just very blessed that I'm a very blessed person. And yeah, just I can't I can't thank God any any more than I do every day, honestly. So that's the most important thing that brings so much joy to me. And then everything else is just my family and, the closest people to me, right? My lovers and my best friends, and some people that I'm just attracting into my life because of the loving energy that I'm giving out.
That is so beautiful. And thanks for sharing that and for
Thank you.
letting us feel that with you.
Yeah, I feel you guys, right?
Mhm.
So I just want you guys to understand that as well. I'm
Mhm.
always here for everybody. My journey is everybody else's journey.
Well, thank you so much for sharing so openly today and for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate you and your friendship. And I look forward to keep working together, honestly.
Thank you. So I have one last question before we complete.
Please.
What is your best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
Wow. You asked really good questions. That's awesome. What is my best advice for living a very amazing? Wow. Um, the best way that I, because even anybody's teaching is something that you want to question, right? But the best way that I've approached it was just having this moment where it's just so beautiful to have this moment right now. I just think that to surrender. I think that's the most important thing, to surrender everything. Um, I think that we have these figures like Christ or Buddha. In Hinduism, it's like Krishna, and what these figures do is they help us really surrender to the will of the universe, to the will of God, and that's when you really experience what life is truly about.
Mhm.
I really think that once you surrender everything, right? How does it go? It's like you get it all when there's no you to have it. Yeah. So I think that's the most important thing, is just keep surrendering, just trust, right? Just that you'll always be safe no matter what, because that's where the fear comes from, that, there's no safety net on the other side. But if you have someone that you believe in, like Christ or like Buddha, I think that everything's possible for sure, no matter what.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
We'll talk to you again soon.